Final Fantasy IV was originally released in the US as Final Fantasy II. While most of us didn't know any better at the time, in addition to the name change, it was also a heavily censored game. While it's easy to make a case for other censored Square games to not be such a big deal, such as Chrono Trigger's translation, which lost some specifics in the dialogue due to space constraints and had some toned down situations, it's pretty much universally accepted that the original English release was definitely watered down for FF4, although that never really stopped us from playing the hell out of it back in the day. The game was made easier, lame edits were put into place to mask some of the malicious intent of the characters, deaths were obscured, and more. Thankfully though, the game has been respectfully re-released unedited on the PlayStation 1 and Game Boy Advance. The version I am reviewing here is the original uncensored game. As one of the first significant RPGs to hit the Super Nintendo, the story for this game was just wild. You're Cecil, captain of the Red Wings, a dark knight, and, well, a villain. Your introduction to the game is essentially a long drawn-out segment featuring you and your crew slaughtering a town of peaceful civilians, all for the sake of a crystal because, well, it's what the King of Baron asked for. Especially coming off of the JRPG stories from the NES, who the hell actually expected this? You aren't the saintly hero of light coming out of nowhere to stop the evil jerk-offs in a vanilla story mostly intended to be a vehicle for working out the kinks in ideal turn-based gameplay. No, you are committing murder. When you return to the castle and get done sleeping with your girlfriend, after very slightly questioning the king's motives, you're given the drudge work of delivering an item to a village along with your best buddy Kane, who, after murdering just a little bit more as you traverse your way to this small little town you know nothing about, it turns out you were actually sent there to destroy the place. The item you were sent to deliver sets the entire godforsaken town ablaze. The arguing and debate of values that goes on during this very scene between Cecil and Kane was powerful. Is it worth saving the life of this little girl? She's a summoner after all. They question both each other and themselves. While previously I would say the Japanese were behind on their video game storytelling methods, the presentation here just kicked ass and in ways had not been done previously. Final Fantasy IV forced you through troubled times. You killed innocent people and now you are hated. You set the town on fire, and now the girl that you managed to salvage seems to have a little animosity built up for you. And then you continue to work your way through more tragedy. Who the hell knows where Kane might be now that the girl you saved summoned Titan to cause an earthquake? Is he dead? On your way traveling through the world, you meet up with a bard who joins your team while also mourning the loss of his recently deceased fiancée who was actually killed by the Red Wings of Baron, and now he feels responsible. The girl's surviving family blames him for the death, and even he gets haunted by a demon form of the girl late at night on one occasion. Today the game might be considered a little cliched, although the story ideas at the time were still ripe and fresh. This level of tragedy from endearing characters is still not as common though. Well-developed characters that you come to enjoy sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Characters have motives and the primary characters even develop, rather than gathering up a gigantic troop and then being able to pick from a pool to form your own party, where maybe the individual characters happen to have stock reactions to certain events. Everything here is specific. Characters often disappear for long periods of time, and when you see them again, if you see them again, you'll be questioning what the hell had actually happened to them. Obviously, they developed and added new motives, but you aren't entirely sure what those might be, and then the game slowly reveals itself to you. The only thing in terms of story I didn't particularly like was probably the last fifth of the game. Without spoiling things, a weird-ass sci-fi plot advancement comes along that I've always found to be rather lame, though not exactly game-destroying. This all sort of leads to a rather insignificant villain. I don't really agree with it. Some people might not like that this game is rather linear, but that's more of a matter of individual taste. I didn't mind it. The artistry is fantastic. The team behind the sprite work did a stellar job. Happy towns are bright and colorful, caves feel dark and dank, large-ass towers deliver a true chilling feeling, and the character designs perfectly nail down and essentially define a classic style of video game art. Nobu Uematsu does his usual fantastic job with the musical score that should really pull you in. I would say that the artistic style did develop over the next two Super Nintendo titles, although this one still looked and felt great. Customization is a little limited, keeping in pace with the linear storytelling. PC gamers hot off of the latest Dungeons & Dragons style games might have some beef here, although I did not mind it that much. The idea of Final Fantasy IV really is not crafting yourself in the way you would want to be represented, but instead to follow the game cartridge itself through a well thought out journey as you hold its hand. The leveling system is as straightforward as you can get. There is no branching skill trees or anything like that. At certain levels you learn specific skills for each character. The bar on customization is set a little low in this regard, and while I had no problem at all with this system back when the Super Nintendo was the latest gen system, I will admit that it is not my absolute favorite gameplay aspect I enjoy going back to. I would mainly just consider this particular quality about the game to be average. Final Fantasy IV pioneered. It ventured beyond the Dragon Quest mold and brought new ideas to the table for games to copy from for years after its release. The presentation is brilliant and about 4/5 of the story truly succeeds. The characterization does very well. The story lacks some complexity and subtleties of later games in the series, but it is still fun to go through. The gameplay is a little oversimplified, though the actual execution of the turn-based fighting is probably the best the genre had ever seen at that point in time. There are a few areas that I would say aged a little worse than others, but all in all, it was a great entry to the Final Fantasy series and still worth checking out if you somehow missed it during its original release. These are definitely characters that I remember. Final Fantasy IV for the Super Nintendo receives an 8 out of 10.